Welcome to Talk Wildlife, and today I have with me Brad Nahill, who is the president and co-founder of Sea Turtles. And we're going to be talking in a minute about Sea Turtle Week, which is this week. We'll talk about general turtle conservation and then a few of the projects that Sea Turtle runs. So first of all, hi Brad.
Hi, how are you, Alan?
I'm very good, thanks. Yourself?
Excellent.
So, and I know you've got a cat lurking in the background, and I'm hoping it'll put in an appearance.
Yeah, we'll see. She's sleeping soundly right now.
So before we sort of go into detail, as I say, this is Sea Turtle Week. So best bet is to sort of set the scene and talk about the fact that, you know, that there's sort of 356 species of turtle in the world, and 7 of them are actually sea turtles. And of those 7, really, they're not doing incredibly well. 3 are vulnerable, 2 critically endangered, 1's endangered, and 1 is sort of data deficient. So, you know, we don't really know how that's doing, but its most recent classification was vulnerable. So clearly, you know, sea turtles are not doing that well. So could we start off by you telling us a little bit about your foundation, you know, what it's about, what it does, and let's talk then a little bit about sort of the challenges that face sea turtles in particular.
Sure, absolutely. So yeah, my organization, Sea Turtles, I see you've got my logo there. That's great. So it's spelled SEE. We've been around since 2008, and we do a few things to help support sea turtle conservation efforts around the world. So, you know, we're based outside of Portland, Oregon. We just have a little home office, so we don't work directly in the field, but there are, you know, so many places around the world. Sea turtles are either nesting or in the waters of more than 100 countries. And there are hundreds of these small community-based organizations around the world working to protect the turtles where they are and study them. And so what we try to do is be a resource for them. So we help raise funds for turtle nesting beaches. We organize trips where people from the US and Europe as well, and really from anywhere, but that's mainly where our people come from, to go visit some of these projects, meet the local researchers, work hands-on with the turtles, and contribute to the conservation efforts and the communities where these turtles live. And we also do education around sea turtles and how, when you're traveling, ways that you can contribute to their conservation and things like that. So in terms of the situation for the turtles worldwide, so yes, you're accurate. Yeah, all of those classifications that you mentioned are correct. The flatback is considered, in Australia, it's considered vulnerable, which is primarily where it lives. So they're all under some form of endangerment. But, you know, when you look a little bit deeper into it, and when you're, you know, kind of steeped in this stuff from day to day, there's actually some really good news out there. But yeah, they are threatened. Their numbers have been reduced quite dramatically over the past couple hundred years. The biggest reasons are people eating their eggs, people eating the meat of some of the kinds of turtles, and from using the shell of the hawksbill turtle in particular, which is people know as tortoise shell. They also frequently get caught in fishing gear, so that can be long lines or shrimp nets or things like that. They're particularly vulnerable to climate change, so rising sea levels is affecting nesting beaches. Beaches getting hotter results in more female hatchlings because the sex of the turtle isn't determined until it's an egg in the nest, and the temperature in the nest is what determines that. So the higher temperatures, the more females that we're seeing be born, so it's skewing the population. Plastic is a big problem that a lot of people associate with sea turtles. A lot of people have probably seen the really tough video to watch of the turtle with the straw coming out of its nose. That was taken by a friend of mine. It's really helped galvanize, I think, the world to start trying to reduce plastic use, which is great, but it's such a huge problem. And it goes from, you know, the macroplastic of the giant fishing nets that get lost at sea and continue fishing even though there's nobody catching the fish and catching other animals, all the way down to the little microplastic, minuscule particles that you can't even see that we're ingesting when we eat fish and when we drink water and things like that. So sea turtles are really vulnerable to that. We believe that every sea turtle on Earth is affected by plastic, either swimming through it, maybe getting entangled in it, confusing plastic bags or balloons for jellyfish, which is a primary food of some of the sea turtles, crawling through trash on the beach as the turtles nest or the hatchlings return to the water. So plastic is a real big issue. There's other issues as well, but those are the big ones that have really reduced the numbers.
So you've mentioned plastics there, and just to put it into context, turtles, how far out into the ocean do they go? Do they actually cover the entire ocean? And if that's the case, are we talking about that plastic issue follows them for the whole of that, the whole way into the ocean? Or is it that the plastic is sort of pretty much around coastlines?
So to answer the first question, turtles do cover the Earth. So it depends on the species, but some of them do really long migrations. For example, loggerhead turtles, there's a nesting beach in Japan where they're born. They cross the entire Pacific Ocean. They go kind of close to Hawaii and then all the way to the Baja California Peninsula of Mexico. And they go there to feed and grow. They like crustaceans, and they're these little red crabs that they go there and they grow and they get big, and then they swim all the way back to Japan. There are leatherback turtles that nest in Malaysia and Indonesia that come all the way to California, all the way up the U.S. West Coast to Alaska, looking for the big jellyfish, and then back to Malaysia and Indonesia. So they are crossing large parts of the ocean, and they do encounter plastic pretty much everywhere, on the beach, in the coastal areas, and deep out at sea. Because what happens is a lot of the plastic that's in the ocean starts on land, but then it gets caught up in these giant ocean currents called gyres. And every part of the ocean has a gyre. The Pacific has two, a northern one and a southern one. So the northern one in the Pacific circles kind of around the Hawaiian Islands. And that has become what's known as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And it's those currents that's bringing that plastic in there. And these loggerheads that are passing back and forth go right through the middle of that. Although, it was initially called the Great Garbage Patch, but what we're learning now is that it's not really a one patch where all the plastic is concentrated. It's spread out through. It's more like a plastiscape. And, it's plastic that you can see, it's plastic that you can't see. So it's really everywhere where the turtles go. So it's affecting them deep at sea, it's affecting them at the coast, it's affecting them on the beach.
Right. Okay, and clearly, plastic is an issue. Climate change, you mentioned, is an issue. Does something like climate change, does it have a greater impact on sort of one species as opposed to another, or is that affecting all the species?
It kind of affects some of the turtles in some different ways. I would say that, so the rising temperature of the beach affects all species. The rising sea levels affects most of their nesting beaches. One in particular, the hawksbill, nests way up. They'll go 20, 30, 40 meters inland sometimes to lay their eggs. So they're probably a little bit less susceptible to that. But coral bleaching is a particular problem associated with climate change that affects certain types of sea turtle. So when ocean temperatures rise, the polyps of the coral that are in the structures will expel. And that is what causes the bleaching. And that's happening in the Great Barrier Reef and in reefs around the world. And that, if it keeps happening, can kill the reefs. So the species of sea turtles that particularly or live in the coral reefs, such as hawksbills in particular, but also loggerheads, green turtles, are affected by that because it's reducing their prey and it's damaging their habitat.
Right, and because you mentioned hawksbill and you mentioned, and we will come on to one of your projects, which is Too Rare to Wear in shortly. But what are the sort of, apart from the likes of climate and plastic and all the rest of it, are they prone to sort of human persecution, for want of a better phrase?
Yes. So they used to be consumed by people a lot more than they are today. Now, most places it's illegal to eat turtles. It's illegal to eat their eggs. There are some exceptions, some places that still have fisheries or some individual beaches that allow it. But for the most part, it's illegal and it's declined quite a bit. And I believe that's one of the big reasons why we're starting to see some nesting beaches where turtles are coming back. But it does still happen in some places. The green turtle in particular is very popular for its meat. Its name actually comes from the color of its fat because they primarily feed on seagrass. And so that seagrass turns their fat green. And so when people cook them, it turns the soup or whatever that they make a green color. So that's where the name came from, not the color of their shell. And then people eat the eggs of all the different species of sea turtles. In a lot of places, there is a continued strong cultural belief that they're sort of a natural aphrodisiac, although there's no science that supports that.
Yeah, which I mean that always astounds me. It's a ridiculous scenario. However, you did mention up front that there was some good news, and I always like good news, especially when it relates to conservation. So give us some of the good news.
So people around the world have been working to protect sea turtles for a long time. There are a number of native communities that used sea turtles or revered sea turtles that have been working with them and managing and protecting them in their own way for thousands of years. But in the Western style of conservation, scientists have been studying and working with them for the past 60 or so years in a significant way. And, we're really starting to see finally some results from that. So when you're working with turtles, you have to be very patient because conservation can move very slowly, but then once it picks up, it can advance really rapidly. And I'll give you a great example of that. There is a beach in Mexico that we have supported with funding, and we've taken people there. It's this amazing place called Colola. And it is the primary nesting beach in the world for the black turtle, which is a subspecies of the green sea turtle found in the Pacific Ocean. So they used to have 60, 70, 80,000 nests per year of this species. But in the 50s and 60s, an industry developed around catching these turtles and selling their eggs and selling their meat, and their numbers declined precipitously. It is an area in Mexico where the indigenous Nahua community lives. And in the early 1980s, a university in Mexico, the University of Michoacan, some researchers heard about this beach, went there, saw how incredible it was, and started a conservation program working with the local community and hiring people to help them patrol the beach and doing some education. So that started in 1982, and they were getting like a few thousand nests a year by then. By 1999, the numbers had dropped to a little over 500 nests, their lowest point. So imagine working with an animal for 17 years trying to bring it back, and the numbers keep going down. They stuck with it. The community stuck with it. And at the turn of the century, the numbers started going back up again, first to, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. And as the 2010s went on, it went up to 10, 15, 20, and now it's gone up exponentially. So now 20 years later, this past season, they had 45,000 nests. So from 500 to 45,000, and that's 2 million hatchlings from that beach alone, which is really extraordinary. And it's because this community, this Nawa indigenous community, working hand in hand with these scientists, they've stopped eating the eggs. In the 80s, Mexico made it illegal to eat the turtles. And so one of the things that we do, we provide funding, and that pays kids in the community to go and collect the eggs and bring them to a hatchery so the kids benefit. There's not a lot of economic opportunity in the area. And so it's one of the biggest success stories that I've ever heard of in all of wildlife conservation, let alone sea turtles. But there are a number of nesting beaches where we're seeing numbers increasing again because the international trade has been ended, because the numbers of turtles getting eaten and eggs have being dropped. There's a lot of people working on fishing gear to try to reduce the number of turtles getting caught in that. So there's a lot of great stuff out there. And just quickly to go back to, you mentioned the different classifications of the turtles. Two of the ones that are now considered vulnerable, less than 10 years ago, were both considered endangered. So the loggerhead in the past 10 years went from endangered to vulnerable, which is good. It's less endangered. And the leatherback was considered critically endangered. So they went from critically endangered to vulnerable. And they changed that, maybe 8 or so, I think, years ago. So that gives you some hope that things are improving for the turtles in a lot of places.
Which is fantastic. I mean, you promised, you said there was good news. That was good news. That was very good news.
It's thousands of people and hundreds of organizations working around the world with communities, with fishermen to try to find solutions. And like I said, it's working in a lot of places.
Yeah. It's you mentioned about the status changing for some of these turtles and for the better. What a lot of people will be wondering is, these are sea turtles. You said so yourself earlier on, they found sort of quite far out into the oceans, and the change in status relies on sort of numbers. So how do you go about assessing that? How do you go about assessing how well the loggerheads are doing? How does that happen?
Yeah, with sea turtles, it's not an especially easy process because, the males spend their entire lives at sea and the females only come ashore to nest. So the way that the assessments are done is looking at what we call index beaches for the different species. So the primary beaches where they nest, looking at them for as long a time scale as possible. One of the things that I think is inherently difficult about these classifications is, though, sea turtles have been around for like 100 million years, and we're looking at 50 years worth of data. But there, we can tell trends over that period of time. So, we try to look at few specific beaches that are representative of the population and whether those are going up or down. So when we talk about numbers related to sea turtles or anything, it's always about the females, the adult female. So if we say, all right, well, we think that there are, maybe 10,000 Kemp's Ridleys, it's adult female Kemp's Ridleys. But to get into like the specifics of the classifications for any animal under the red list of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN, to be considered critically endangered, you need at least an 80% drop in the population over 3 generations. So hatching to mating, adulthood. For a turtle, that can be as few as 15 years, although we think it's probably more 20 to as many as 30 years. So like 60 to 90 year period, there has to be at least an 80% drop to be considered critically endangered, has to be at least a 60% drop to be considered endangered, and a 40% drop to be considered vulnerable. Yeah. But a lot of these beaches, we haven't even been studying them for that long. So, we do the best we can with the data that we have, but it's it's a difficult and challenging thing, and it's not always accurate, and they're very time consuming. For example, the hawksbill sea turtle hasn't been looked at in a long time, probably more than 10 years, and I know that some folks want to try to, but it's a lot of work to go through that whole process. So it needs to be looked at again. We're seeing some increases in numbers there as well, but maybe it's not critically endangered anymore, but we don't know.
So with regards to conservation of sea turtles, clearly if this was a land-based animal, if we were talking about a primate or something like that, then you can look at it and you can go, okay, so we need to change that habitat, we need to manage that habitat better. With sea turtles, it's slightly different because their habitat is the ocean. So we've talked about plastics and we've talked about global warming, which are global issues. Yeah. What else can be done? I know you can protect them on the beaches and you can protect them, as they're hatching. Is there anything else that can be done and is being done? And this is, I don't know the answer to this, is just a question that popped into my head. But is there anything else that can be done actually out into the oceans? Changes in sort of fishing laws, sort of stuff like that. What else can be done out in the oceans to actually conserve them?
Yeah. So, yes, there's a lot of people working on fishing, both from the policy side as well as from the technical side. I have a good friend named Jesse Sanko at the University of Arizona who's doing some really interesting research in Baja California, Mexico, working with fishermen, trying to figure out ways to keep turtles out of nets. And they have figured out, well, researchers have figured out that if you put a light on a net, like a buoy, the turtles can see it and avoid it, but it doesn't affect the fish. And so the fish still get caught, right, and the turtles can get away. And so, I think it was, 60, 70% reductions in number of turtles and other species getting caught with these lights. And so what they're trying to do is, because these small scale Mexican fishermen don't, they don't make a lot of money fishing. They're barely getting by as it is. So to buy this expensive technology on these lines where they need dozens of them is a huge challenge. And so what they're trying to do is they figured out a way to make these lights solar powered, so that they don't need to go and replace batteries, and it's more environmentally friendly, and they can leave the nets out there for longer periods of time. So there's a lot of things like that. Shrimp nets, for example, there was a thing actually created by a shrimp fisherman where they put a barrier, a metal grate across the mouth of the fishing net, and that the turtles come in the net and they hit this and then are pushed out like a little hole in the bottom of the net while the shrimp are small enough to pass through. So there's a lot of stuff like that happening. So from the policy side of fisheries stuff is a really big challenge. The different fisheries around the world, the tuna fisheries and the other kinds of fisheries. I'm not an expert in fisheries, but there are these international councils that manage them, and they're primarily managed by the fishermen themselves. And so for conservationists to go and try to change their policies, encourage them to use different kinds of gear and things, can be really difficult. There's been some progress made, but the fishing industry and fishermen, it's one of the oldest professions, and it's one where the fishermen have fished certain ways for very long periods of time, and they found it to be effective, and in a lot of cases, don't feel like they need to change or want to change or can afford to change. And so it's a really big issue. It's a really challenging one, but there are a lot of people working on it. And I think that's improving in a lot of places, as well as some of these councils and fishermen are starting to become more open to new ideas and working collaboratively instead of in a lot of cases, just conservationists and fishermen fighting. That happens a lot, but there are some great examples of collaboration where progress has been made.
Yeah, and earlier on you mentioned sort of, New Mexican fishermen who can't afford these things and all the rest of it. What I saw then, and again when you've just been talking, is what I saw was this sort of the small scale operations. What about the big commercial operations? How much of an impact are they having, and how much are they trying to mitigate against that?
They're having a huge impact, not just in terms of turtles, but other animals that are being caught. Dolphins are still caught very commonly. Other kinds of fish that are not the target species are getting caught. And one thing that the conservation community has really tried to do is getting observers on these fishing vessels so that when a turtle or another animal is caught, that they can confirm that, one, that it gets caught, so there's data on it, and two, that measures are in place to try to free that animal and get it back into the water as possible. But yeah, some of these big fisheries are really devastating in a lot of ways, and in a lot of ways. So there are certain parts of the ocean that are more productive, and the world's fisheries go there. So off the coast of South America in the Pacific Ocean, kind of the area sort of around the Galapagos Islands, and that part of the ocean is the biggest area of fishing in the world. And there's European fishing fleets and Japanese fishing fleets and US, and they all concentrate there. And when they take their fish and catch all these other animals, it not only affects the ocean and sea turtles and the other animals that get caught, it also can hurt the livelihood of these small, artisanal fishermen who are just trying to make a living, just to feed these huge seafood markets from around the world.
Yeah, so clearly on that, international policy really needs to be sort of stepped up to make sure that, something is done about that, because, it's all very well sort of conservationists working with the small traditional fishermen who have been doing it for years and living alongside turtles for years and had no huge impact on the turtles. Clearly if there's an impact there, that needs managing, but, that's excuse the pun, but a small fish in the ocean compared to the devastation that might be done by the international, fisheries. So, that's something that we need to keep an eye on the policy there and see how that, which direction that goes in.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we have seen some examples, like in Mexico, there are some examples of the small scale fisheries having outsized impacts on animals like sea turtles. But yeah, for me, the big issue that the biggest area of reform that's needed are these large international fisheries.
Sure. So we're struggling a little bit with the signal, but I'm going to press on. I think what we need to do now is just talk a little bit about sort of Sea Turtle Week, because this is Sea Turtle Week, and just talk about, because it was founded by your organisation. So just give us a bit of background to what it's trying to achieve and what it has achieved, because I know, having looked at your annual reports, that the figures have sort of gone from strength to strength around this, which congratulations to you on that. But yeah, if you give us a bit of a background as to what Sea Turtle Week is.
Sure. So we can't claim to have started Sea Turtle Week. So that it was originally started by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration here, as part of the U.S. government, NOAA, as it's known, has been doing its own version of Sea Turtle Week for several years. But a couple of years ago, we decided, we want to broaden this. We want to scale it up, and we want to have our own week. Sharks get so much attention during Shark Week that we said, well, we need one ourselves. So we said, all right, well, when is the best time for it? And so right now is the best time because June 8th is World Oceans Day, was World Oceans Day, is World Oceans Day. And then June 16th is World Sea Turtle Day, and that celebrates the birthday of Dr. Archie Carr, who was one of the original Western founders of sea turtle research and conservation. And so there are 7 days in between those 2 days. So we thought, well, that's perfect. Each day we can celebrate a different species of sea turtle and a corresponding threat to that sea turtle and raise awareness. So we put the call out last year. We said, who wants to join us for this? We put together a website, a simple website, seaturtleweek.com. And we invited the sea turtle community to join. And last year we had about 70 organizations. We reached about 4 million people through it, through all the outreach, which was very exciting. And so this year we put out another call and said, hey, let's grow it again. And it doubled. We have now more than 125 organizations participating. And so we put out some graphics. We now have Instagram and Twitter feeds that people can follow if they're interested at Sea Turtle Week. And so it's just having fun. It's, you know, mostly social media. Some groups are doing online webinars and presentations or in-person events where that's possible right now with the pandemic. But, you know, it's a week to learn about sea turtles and to celebrate them and have some fun with it.
Yeah, and again, you know, the numbers are great. So congratulations on that. That's it's really good, and it's really interesting that again, you know, a sea turtle is something that not many people will ever see in their natural habitat. They might be lucky enough to see them on beaches and laying eggs, but there's very few people who will actually see them in a natural habitat. So for them to create such a stir, you know, well, number one, it's obviously a challenge for you raising the awareness because they are so almost invisible to people really in the natural habitat. But for people to sort of then take to heart Sea Turtle Week is absolutely amazing. It's really, really refreshing.
Yeah, it's been really fun to see people run with the idea and create their own stuff around it and grow and broaden it. I mean, that's the whole idea. We didn't do it to promote our own programs. We did it to promote the animals. And, you know, what we're hoping is we can get it big enough that we can, you know, start working with, you know, maybe National Geographic or BBC and have some programming around it as well and turn it into, you know, a big thing every single year. Obviously, there's a lot happening right now. There's, you know, really important movement for, you know, racial justice happening, not just in the US, but around the world. Mm-hmm. And so we want to acknowledge that as much as possible, you know, and then the pandemic and everything. So, you know, we're excited that we're able to get some attention right now. We do want to keep it in perspective with all the issues that people are facing around the world, but it's, you know, it's a way to have fun and a way to a way to learn. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think what we'll do, because, you know, clearly there is a lot more we need to talk about from sea turtles' point of view. I mentioned up front talking about billion baby turtles, about Too Rare to Wear, your conservation travel, and also the education programs that you've got. But I'm really conscious that, you know, this is sort of starting to break up a bit more than I would like. So I think what we'll do is, if it's okay with you, I'll edit this one and put this one out for Sea Turtle Week. So I'll try and get this out first thing tomorrow morning, UK time. And then what we'll do is we'll put something in the schedule so that we can talk again at length about a bit more about your work at Sea Turtle and certainly those projects that I've mentioned, because I'm really keen to talk about billion baby turtles and also Too Rare to Wear. So if that's all right with you, that's what we'll do. You know, maybe we'll put a date in the diary for next week. Okay.
Sounds good. And be sure to send me a link when you put it live, because we'll put it out on our social media and Sea Turtle Week and everything as well.
Yeah, sure I will. So what I'm going to do is I'll edit it. I'll probably try and get it out tomorrow morning. So I think what we'll do is, you know, we'll leave this one here, but I think definitely we need to talk more because there's a lot you're doing that we need to showcase. So I'll be in touch with you afterwards and we'll see what we can put together.
Okay, sounds good. My next week is pretty open, so just let me know.
Great stuff. All right, Brad. Thank you ever so much for your time.
All right, you too.
I'll see you next week.
All right, bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye now.